in between, or characters getting stuck on objects in the environment and glitching out of the conversation. It is a technically frustrating reframing of the conversation mechanics, though not so frustrating as the reductive approach to player dialogue on the whole. The first two games in the Fallout franchise were such incredible role-playing titles because of the complexity of the writing, both in the NPCs and in the range of response given to the player. Fallout 3, at least, still had good, neutral, and evil. New Vegas was a major return to form, complex choices with a new transparency regarding how skills and attributes play in. Fallout 4 gives you 4 dialogue choices, only 2 of which mean anything. Yes or no. You have an enthusiastic yes, a skeptical or sarcastic yes, a no, and a request for more information. Rather than being able to ask several questions, you only ever get the one, which then advances the dialogue to the next response where you can ask another question or else respond another way. There were less than half a dozen conversations in my 97-hour playthrough where I was able to ask more than a single question at a time. And where Fallout 3 gave you a binary choice more often than not in how you solve a quest, a compassionate solution and a mercenary one, Fallout 4 more rarely gives you an option at all. Your choice is just whether or not you do the quest, the yes or no choice, not the good or evil choice. In Fallout 4, storytelling and character interaction feels like just one more function of the simulation, another minigame and not part of the game's design foundation. Fallout 4 plays just as well, functions just as coherently as if you do no quests, as if you do most of them. You'll just level slower. Charisma-based characters find themselves mostly using their powers of persuasion to get extra caps for quest rewards. Most quests in this game have 3 levels of speech challenges dedicated solely to asking for more money, and much less often for simplifying the solutions to the quest. The thing is, though, the conversations are in real time, so if you quick save in the middle of a conversation, you quick load to that exact moment. So, even though speech success is determined by a digital roll of the dice, you can roll these dice over and over and over again. It is the least satisfying dialogue of the franchise in terms of interactivity and depth of response. Less interactive by far than even Fallout 3. And again, the focus on procedurally generated radiant quests is a major part of the problem. There are some great, handcrafted side quests, like the last voyage of the USS Constitution, where you help a crew of delusional robots repair a rocket-equipped version of a sailing ship, or Human Error, where a remote trading community called Covenant uses the GOAT test from Fallout 3 as a psychological Rorschach to screen for androids, no matter how human they may seem when the torture begins. But these are serious exceptions to the rule. These quests do offer branching choices. The vast majority of quests are constructed by combining things randomly from a list of locations, activities, and enemies. Fallout 4 absolutely does value player agency, however, and in the greater experience of the game's final act, player choice really does win out, but only on the macro scale. The little consequences, the smaller ramifications of your choices, don't matter and aren't kept track of. Again, most side quests don't really offer a choice, and those that do aren't revisited in any way. NPCs that you help are reduced to a unit of population in your settlement management screen. If you fix their narrative struggles, you still have to get their food, water, defense, and happiness statistics consistently up. This is how you show you care about your communities, using the scrap economy and the settlement building interface to keep all those numbers up. If you had just one town to look after, that would be one thing. But as you get deeper into the game, it's clear that they forewent the kind of defined, charismatic fringe communities of Fallout 3, like the Republic of Dave or Andale, for blank canvas settlements onto which the minigame template can be grafted. It's a form of player choice. Whatever you build will become the actual town. The game map literally changes based on player interaction. But it is the same sort of interaction every time. Settlements are interchangeable and indistinct in the hope that the player will care enough about them to create those distinctions themselves. It's a peculiar sort of role-playing experience. You're simultaneously the general of the Minutemen, a knight of the Brotherhood, a top agent of the Railroad, and an operative of the Institute, and you micromanage the destinies of dozens of settlements. You're known across the Commonwealth, and yet you do all that without really ever defining your character in any meaningful way. The voiced responses allow the game to abbreviate your choices on the dialogue wheel to just 1 or 2 words, just 1 or 2 player inputs, yes or no, and the player character's voice actor takes up the slack and lets the dialogue progress. But the player character is never more than a vague idea. the leader of everything. And only in the game's last hours does it require any kind of absolute decision where one path would contradict another. It's a very Bethesda move. In Oblivion or Skyrim, factions were mostly non-competitive. You would eventually lead the Fighters Guild, and the Mages College, and the Thieves Underground, and that was the way of it. Bethesda has never embraced the idea that a character should not be able to do everything in a game based on build. But that saps the significance of having builds at all. In fact, Fallout 4 scraps the vast majority of the RPG mechanics that the series has been using. Skills are out. Perks, as they had been used, are out. The individual significance of attributes has been scaled back. Instead, each attribute has a list of 10 abilities. The number of that attribute will unlock abilities up to that number on the list. If you only have 3 luck, you can choose the first 3 abilities off the luck tree. You can choose any ability anytime if you have the attribute. At least, that's the back of the box. Each ability also has ranks, and those ranks unlock at level thresholds. So, sure, you can take the gun nut ability and modify weapons from level 2, but you won't be able to upgrade that ability fully and use all the upgrades until level 39. In this way, you have different builds, but the efficiency of those builds is strung out and standardized over time. Even though no 2 players will choose the same abilities in the same order, or at least are not likely to, the chances are high that by the endgame, most players will have similar characters and have played the majority of the quests the same way. It is role-playing in that you have a role and have agency, but it is not a role that the player is able to define uniquely, either mechanically or narratively. You do have to eventually choose between the factions, though, and that's one of the areas where Fallout 4 really shines. This version of the Brotherhood of Steel is much closer to the series' original vision of them, as opposed to the goody-two-shoes you see in Fallout 3. Here, they're zealous about technological control to the point of extremism, and they're portrayed as being dangerous and strange. The Brotherhood is an occupying force in Fallout 4, taking the Enclave's place in the unexpected invasion from the air story beat. They make much more sense than the Enclave, and the game is very upfront about their presence in Boston being a true crusade against the Institute, against anyone who they perceive as monsters. The Railroad are a little more cliché, a collection of likable riffraff trying to save synths from their life of servitude to the Institute. They're pretty much like you'd expect, going off of Fallout 3's replicated Man Quest. And the Minutemen are the generic good guy faction this time around, trying to help the whole wasteland get on its feet. They're the faction whose influence you expand by playing the settlement building and management minigame. They have some great quests, though, like retaking their old stockpile at Fort Independence, which has gone from fort to historical site to fort again, thanks to the nuclear apocalypse. And then there's the Institute. If Fallout 4 did anything right, it's this. The Institute is a really great idea, executed well. And when people say that the plot is good, this is a lot of what they're referring to. You don't get there until late in the game, although it ought to be earlier. The whole plot, up to that point, is about finding Sean, your kidnapped son. You know the Institute took him, but you don't know why. So you go all over the entire Commonwealth finding clues, making allies, and building an enormous device in one of your settlements to break in and rescue him. It seems like the final mission of the game. It actually marks the end of the second act, with the potential of the final third act to be much longer and more meaningful than what came before. You see, Sean, your son, is an old man, and he runs the Institute. He asks for your help, welcomes you as a colleague. He hopes that he'll give the Institute a chance and see the good that it's doing. This is a phenomenal narrative shift. It reframes all the other organizations' goals and their negative interpretations of the Institute's inscrutable endeavors against what you see for yourself. Now that you've found Sean, can you really see him as a villain? It's well done. Really well done, actually, and accomplished without being overwrought. But if you've been playing the game for close to 70 hours before doing that quest, like I did, it makes the game incredibly top-heavy in terms of meaningful content. I had the vast majority of the map discovered by then, and all of a sudden I have dozens of new quests for all 4 factions, instead of a clear path to the climax. Again, this would be great if I hadn't already played the vast majority of the game world. All these new quests had me repeating dungeons that I'd already cleared maybe half the time, taking me to fast travel points I'd already discovered in other cases. I had jumped the gun, and my sense of wonder in the exploration was getting close to being tapped out right when the game's plot, the really good part where there's a sense of weight to what you're doing, was spooling up. My desire to save the climax for the last thing after the side content ended up preempting and making redundant a huge portion of the side content. I tried to play Fallout 4 like I played Fallout 3. Very rarely did that approach yield the best results. And you shouldn't play the factions like New Vegas either, where you pick a side and explore their conflicts across the whole landscape. Progressing the plot here is very dependent on doing quests for all 4 factions, and returning to their faction headquarters on a pretty consistent basis. Only when one faction declares that another must be destroyed are you expected to choose. Until then, it's less like New Vegas and more like, well, a little like Oblivion with guns. That is such a dusty old meme, but Fallout 4 wears it better than Fallout 3 ever did. The map is closer to Oblivion than to Skyrim, smaller, less reliant on physical barriers, with environments that transition from one region to the next abruptly more often than smoothly. Fewer side quests in the rural areas themselves than either Fallout 3 or Skyrim. A focus on reputation among faction organizations where you meet an ensemble of members and then climb over them on your way to leading the organizations. The content is better curated than in Oblivion. Fewer pointless template dungeons, certainly. But there's a feeling of frivolousness running throughout Fallout 4 in a way that I did experience with Oblivion, but not with Skyrim and not with Fallout 3. The gunplay is better than Fallout 3 by a mile, and it's pretty safe to say that combat in general is more visceral, responsive, and well-paced in Fallout 4 than any other Bethesda game. There are no more excessive bullet sponge enemies like Fallout 3, especially the enemies added by the Broken Steel DLC. While some enemies are higher level and take a while to whittle down, the rhythm of combat is consistently much faster, less stat-based, and plays like a straightforward FPS without an auto-loot feature. There have been many interviews and articles about how the MMO FPS Destiny influenced the mechanics of Fallout 4 in many ways, like the awkward and complicated upgrade system where pistols and rifles can be made from the same base frame, and different ammunition types and rates of fire can be swapped in and out. In my experience, the upgrade system was pointless until after level 30. Enemies always dropped weapons better than I could make, locked out from the top of the upgrade tree by level requirements I hadn't met. And the amount of junk needed to upgrade a single weapon from a basic version to a fully customized one is huge. Junk has always been a big part of Fallout. The original had many junk items, useful mainly for their flavor text. Pick up a box of instant mac and cheese, get a quip about how this kind of food is totally incomprehensible to your raised-in-the-vault character. Fallout 3 and New Vegas used junk decoratively, with some limited utility if you have the junk cannon or if you enjoyed crafting. Fallout 4 makes them one of the actual foundations of the game experience, more important than dialogue by a considerable margin. Junk fuels upgrades. Junk builds your settlements. Junk repairs your power armor. Junk allows the plot to progress by requiring you to use the workshop menu. In Fallout 3, you'd pick up as many weapons as you could, then scrapped some for repairs and sold the rest. Now, you scrap them all for parts. Parts that allow you to bypass the shops entirely. Barter is pretty much completely optional in Fallout 4. The scrap economy is used to do everything. Upgrade and improve your whole inventory. So the things that used to be obviously important, armor, cigarettes, weapons, are not half as important as 4 old typewriters and 24 coffee cups, which you scrap for screws, ceramic, and other tiny components. The game is about exploration and discovery, mostly so that you can acquire more and more of these components, of which you will use thousands over the course of an extensive playthrough. It slows the game down considerably. I spent 8 levels investing solely in strength upgrades to improve my inventory capacity. Expanding the importance of scavenging is a great idea, but its execution becomes so critical to the entire rhythm of play that it's kind of frustrating. It makes petty junk equally as important as things of obvious value. This is true 2 ways. I can't sort out what is truly valuable in my inventory, and I can't sort out what is truly valuable in my quest log. Why explore? Is it the thrill of discovery, or is it more your infinite hunger for wonder glue? Slowly, over the course of 100 hours, the latter supplants the former. Let's take a look at how Fallout 4 uses 2 of the most significant pieces of franchise iconography, vaults and power armor. One is a narrative and world design feature, the vaults. The other is a mechanical feature, the power armor. Vaults are a wonderfully Fallout idea. Each vault is not only a Fallout shelter in its basic sense, each is a social science experiment, unique from all the others, usually with a twist that proves fatal. Vault 13 in the first game had a water chip that was designed to fail.
on a personal.
Vaults and power armor. One is a narrative and world design feature, the vaults. The other is a mechanical feature, the power armor. Vaults are a wonderfully Fallout idea. Each vault is not only a Fallout shelter in its basic sense, each is a social science experiment, unique from all the others, usually with a twist that proves fatal. Vault 13 in the first game had a water chip that was designed to fail. Your character's journey in ultimate exile was an event and an experiment set in motion before the war itself. In Fallout 2, Vault 8 has rooms full of crates with nothing but water chips instead of more valuable supplies. Fallout 3 got incredibly creative with how it handled the vaults, and they were the most memorable of all the large dungeons in the game. Frequently, their environmental storytelling was the best you could find, and that's for both Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas. Take New Vegas' Vault 11. It's an ethics experiment in which an overseer is elected every year, and then that overseer must sacrifice themselves for what is supposed to be the safety of the vault. In reality, once the vault refused to elect an overseer, refused to send someone to their deaths, the vault's program would congratulate them on their integrity and humanity and open the door. By the time that this was discovered, almost everyone was dead, and the guilt of it was overpowering. Or how about the bizarre, outrageous Vault 108 in Fallout 3, inhabited by the mad clones of one poor vault dweller, the infamous Gary? Or how about also from Fallout 3, Vault 92, where some of the greatest musicians of the nation were driven to homicidal madness by an endless high-frequency whine? Entering into a vault feels like an episode of The Twilight Zone, a morbid kind of puzzle. How did these vaults fail, and why? Vaults in previous games were huge, especially in Fallout 3 and New Vegas. While there are architectural similarities between vaults in Fallout 3 and 4, the ones in 4 are much smaller, closer to the ones in Fallout 1 and 2. And their stories are much simpler. Vault 111, freeze everybody. Vault 95, put a bunch of addicts in a sealed environment with a bunch of drugs. Vault 81, do mean medical experiments, unless you decide not to. Vault 114, make the rich feel inconvenienced. There's just one vault in Fallout 4 that really feels like a classic Fallout vault in terms of scale and environmental storytelling. Vault 75, underneath Malden Middle School. As children entered the vault, they were separated from their families. Then their families were killed, and the children were used in an artificial genetic selection experiment, trying to create the one true American boy over generations of selection by the overseer and staff. A children's rebellion ended the experiment and caused the vault to fail. It's a magnificently creepy location, and the way the story is slowly doled out as the children's dormitories give way to blood-soaked test chambers is very effective. It's so masterfully done as a bit of environmental storytelling, and almost all the vaults in Fallout 3 and New Vegas had similarly eerie and well-developed stories, that you wonder why they didn't go for more than just one. For the majority of Fallout 4, what do you get? Vault 111 is a brief pit stop for the main plot, tiny in scale. Vault 114 is just a shootout with mobsters while you're looking for Nick Valentine. And Vault 95 is a shootout between the Gunners and the Brotherhood of Steel, with some good loot at the bottom of the vault. It's as if, with Fallout 4, they knew that vaults were a key part of the Fallout experiment, so the vaults went in, but without the exuberantly creative approach that the franchise had previously taken. In almost 100 hours of play, less than 45 minutes of the game was quality, memorable vault diving. Fallout 4 has times when its iconic elements are used cleverly, but those times are depressingly infrequent in the franchise's traditional world-building. When it comes to a mechanical gameplay device and not a thematic one, Fallout 4 demonstrates a lot more obvious care and consideration. Power armor has been with the series from the get-go. Fallout 4 has got the same armor on the cover as Fallout 1 and 3, but it's used in a completely different way, one that works better with the new directions that the game is taking. Instead of saving power armor for the end of the game, Fallout 4 gives it to you right away, within the first couple hours. I was furious about this at first. What the hell was this? What kind of point is there in any other armor when you have this giant metal shell to protect you? Right away. Well, I was mistaken. It's true that power armor's placement at the beginning of the game instead of towards the end is demonstrative of Fallout 4's whole approach to Fallout iconography. Do it obviously, make sure it's right up front. But unlike the vaults, power armor has nearly every detail of design contributing to the long-term rhythms of the game. Power armor breaks, it runs out of power, it's expensive in terms of in-game resources to use, and it's cumbersome. You have to take it off a lot to use terminals, and the HUD takes up double the screen space of one doing normally. The whole suit feels powerful, heavy, and deeply physical. The sound effects of the boots, the hydraulic hisses and whines, how your character has to pop it open and climb in and out, although it's placed so much differently in the rhythm of the game, your connection to it is actually much deeper and more dynamic than in previous games. It's not just the best armor, it's a mobile war platform. By the end of the game, I was using it for most everything anyway, like in previous titles. The shooting mechanics are faster and more brutal than ever before. Power armor lets you handle that in a way that feels more physical and impressive than in previous implementations. Then there's its utility as a hazard suit. The glowing sea is one of the most beautiful areas in the game, and one of the most classically Fallout parts of it. Deep piles of radioactive rubble, glowing pools of sickly water, occasional points of interest jutting up through the haze. It's like the glow and the divide wrapped in one, neatly tied up in Fallout 3's classic exploration mechanics. Quite literally, the best of both worlds from an environmental design perspective. I accidentally wandered into it without power armor the first time, and I was close to death most of the journey. Your suit has a utility more like a vehicle than traditional armor, and that remove, viewing this devastation from behind the faceplate of a centuries-old war machine, is such a genuinely unique experience. It's an example of Fallout 4 really living up to its potential, and the game has plenty of examples of truly great Fallout moments, from landscapes to faction choice. The overall impression, though, is a lot less unique and memorable compared to previous titles. What makes a Fallout game? Is it just the mood, or is it in the details of the world building? If you're focusing on the mood of Fallout, Fallout 4 is well worth your time, regardless of failures in other areas. If you're coming from the values of the first two games, though, there's one thing that seals the deal on Fallout 4's problematic movement away from its roots. There are no ending slides. There are 4 endings based on faction choice, like how Fallout 3 had 3 different endings based on morality score. But the heart of Fallout, to me, has always been in how the ending articulated the consequences of so many of your smaller choices. There were ending slides of a sort in Fallout 3, depending on particular quest solutions, but the smaller ramifications of your journey weren't expanded on. New Vegas was such a tremendous return to form that I just assumed that Fallout 4 would follow suit. Dozens, if not hundreds, of decisions in your New Vegas playthrough, from companion quests to disputes between rural settlements to offbeat side stories, were covered in exhaustive detail by the ending slides. That's the thing about Fallout 1, 2, and New Vegas. All those different solutions to a quest wasn't just about content in its generic advertorial sense. They were all an expression of the unique narrative role-playing that the games offered. The epilogues gave everything you did weight. You did quests with an expectation that you would receive closure on them in the slides. Not all the quests, but quite a few, enough to paint an accurate picture of who your character was and what they wanted from the world, what they got out of the world. In Fallout 3, quest solutions boiled down to the binary and a half morality system. Good, evil, and give me my caps. So it made sense that the ending slides only really addressed the general paths and not the specific details. That's Fallout 3's deal. Fallout 4 goes even farther in the direction away from New Vegas' approach. The only thing that the ending cinematic gives closure to is the opening cinematic, and it is tremendously frustrating. So, yes, your faction choice and the moral ramifications of your faction choice, one of 4, is addressed. But what's mostly being wrapped up is the nostalgia. A lot of talk about the gone-away world and how hard it is to let that go and build something new, but gosh darn it, the Vault Dweller did a pretty good job, don't you think? Fallout 4's voice player character, although you have yes or no choices and a minor degree of tonal control over the dialogue, is not ever the player's own creation. The player character has their own arc, whether the player relates to it or not, and that arc is about nostalgia for the family and the civilization that was taken from them. So when the game ends and the cinematic comes around, only one choice matters: faction choice. Not even any kind of modifying factor for morality. Your morality is supposed to be reflected in the faction choice. The ending cinematic caps off a sentimental theme that the player probably hadn't related to for dozens of hours, if ever. It is completely unmoored from what the player actually accomplished in their playthrough. Of course, the game continues after the climax. The epilogue never ends as you continue to do quests and locations that you missed, as well as an infinite supply of Radiant quests. You can play and level and live within the wasteland simulation of Fallout 4 endlessly. That isn't the Fallout I know. Fallout needs to have a definitive end, so that the patchwork of your decisions can be examined as a whole. Even Fallout 3 capped off its epilogue eventually with Broken Steel. That's the real legacy of Fallout as a role-playing game to me. That doesn't mean that a game without traditional Fallout design features can't be part of the Fallout brand. Fallout Tactics is instantly recognizable as a Fallout title despite its peculiarities, but even Fallout Tactics has ending slides and a range of endings. It's clear that Fallout 4's conception of what's meaningful about Fallout is more a part of Bethesda's exploration of new gameplay rhythms than a modernization of the franchise's traditional elements. Fallout 4 is a wonderful game and a real technical achievement for Bethesda. It succeeds in all its ambitions, but all its ambitions are in the direction of the game being a responsive, recognizable, open-world action title. They seem to have taken more than just customizable weapons from Destiny. They've also taken the idea that a good game is one that encourages faithful repetition, an enjoyable and addictive gameplay loop. Fallout 4 has that, and to get that, they sacrifice more than I'm comfortable with. Thanks for watching. This video and all the other videos I do.
That's what you get for loving me. That's what you get for loving me.
As a Fallout fan from back when the isometrics were all we had, I personally already had my moment of disillusionment with the modern direction of the Fallout franchise back with Fallout 4. There were so many things I wanted that game to be, and in the end it wasn't any of them. Fallout 4 was thematically sloppy, dramatically limp, and difficult to connect with on any level beyond the mechanical. With the Far Harbor DLC, they did reverse course and made something more traditionally Fallout. Far Harbor was stronger, tighter written, and more memorable than the main game by far. Far Harbor, though, was a deviation from the new vision of what a Fallout game is supposed to be like, rather than the new norm. The last DLC for Fallout 4 was the most prophetic. Nuka World was the Fallout aesthetic boiled down to a literal theme park, where a new endgame for the main world was introduced that let you raid the settlements you'd spent so long building up, ensuring that any sense of meaning or permanence you might have held on to dissolves into a pool of caustic novelty. Fallout 4 was often beautiful, it was exciting, it was engaging in its own ways, which were principally mechanical. To enjoy Fallout 4, I had to let go of my own expectations for the game and try to figure out what the game was trying to do instead, if it wasn't living up to the Fallout in my mind's eye. Fallout 4 was such a frustrating, transformative experience that I paid almost no attention to Fallout 76 at all when it was being developed. It was centered around multiplayer, after all, not single-player. It was a reiteration of Fallout 4's crafting loop, but even fiddlier. It would have no living NPCs, no player dialogue at all. Every revelation about the game seemed almost precision-engineered to irritate me and diminish my interest. Now that it's out, it's Bethesda's worst-reviewed game in years and years, and the backlash has been massive. This puts me in a bit of an awkward position, though. I had zero expectations about this game. I thought it was going to be a miserable disaster. I was ready to hate it. But I played it for like 116 hours, went down damn near every road, found close to nearly every marked location, and I have to say I liked it a lot more than I ever did Fallout 4. Its aggressive artificiality and lack of meaningful storytelling or player choice aren't so much new directions as they are honest reckonings with something that's always been true about the Bethesda Fallouts. Believability of character and concreteness of world have never been priorities compared to visual iconography and expansive dungeoneering. Fallout 76 is, truly, the full flower of a seed that was planted back in Fallout 3 when you could choose to detonate a nuclear bomb and destroy the town of Megaton because you and some old man in a tower thought that it would be kind of fun. Fallout 76 is utterly disconnected from the original games and the approach to RPG design on display in Fallout New Vegas. This disconnection is, counterintuitively, what makes Fallout 76 more likable than Fallout 4. It's not pretending to be interested in things that the developers clearly aren't actually interested in, like dialogue, like environmental consistency or believability, like thematic depth and player choice. So instead of Fallout 4, where it tried to include those things in incomplete, unenthusiastic ways, this time it simply chucks them out the window entirely to focus on what Fallout means to Bethesda as an action-first experience and a consumer franchise. A lot of the reaction to Fallout 76 has been a kind of wounded surprise, holding up how estranged the game is from what made people fall in love with the setting and the franchise in the first place. I'm not saying those people are wrong. On the contrary, I do largely agree. But I don't agree with the surprise. Nuka World wasn't just the final DLC for Fallout 4, it was a statement of intent. It was a way of looking at Fallout that saw the wasteland as a theme park. Ride the radon blaster. Stop for a delicious iguana on a stick. Pose for a picture with a real live ghoul. Visit Deathclaw Island. Be sure to hit the gift shop on the way you're out. It confused the choice to set the apocalypse in a 50s retro future from its original purpose as a source of black humor and cultural critique with a genuine celebration of mid-century consumerism. Fallout 76 not only continues, but doubles down on that trend. In fact, it's a more materialistic game than even Diablo, for the most part. The large and small parts of the game's crafting loops all come back down to stuff. Always needing more stuff. Always needing better stuff. Every second of play is fundamentally motivated by and oriented towards acquisition of stuff. Previous Fallouts have revolved around frontier politicking, races against the clock, fulfilling an iffy prophecy. Even Fallout 4 was, in the end, kind of about choosing a vision for humanity's future in the Commonwealth from the 4 options provided. Fallout 76 has one plot, one moral, one law. Shop till you drop, then respawn and shop again. The reason there hasn't yet been a global thermonuclear conflict is a thing called MAD, or Mutually Assured Destruction. It's not just that 2 large arsenals going off will cancel each other out, it's that enough nukes going off at once will poison the entire planet in drastic, irrevocable ways. The largest is a thing called nuclear winter. The idea is like how volcanoes can blot the skies for days and weeks, and how the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs filled the air with impenetrable smoke for months and years. A global nuclear war and its resulting firestorms will kick up so much radioactive dust and debris into the atmosphere that it will create a barrier to light that will kill forests and kill the ecosystem, and then the radioactive particles will fall all over the world as part of the literally apocalyptic weather that kind of disturbance would kick up. This could go on for years, decades even. This is why previous Fallouts, and post-nuclear media in general, has once verdant areas portrayed as desert. Once the air clears, there will be little left alive on the ground, from the tallest tree to the lowliest moss. Land laid to waste, wasteland. Fallout 76 takes place just 25 years after the bombs fell, making it, by a huge margin, the closest Fallout in time to the especially severe part of the nuclear apocalypse that the nuclear winter represents. So when I heard that was the year the game was set, I expected an extra broken, extra barren, extra cruel environment. Instead, Fallout 76 takes place in a verdant paradise where everyone is dead anyway from a pandemic of plot convenience. The idea is that the bombs didn't directly fall on West Virginia, being of limited strategic importance, and so it was spared the kind of devastation that marked the capital wasteland of the Commonwealth. Sure, there's mutations galore and the questionable inclusion of iconic enemies like super mutants and rad scorpions, but Fallout 76 tries to channel the natural, rural splendor of real-life West Virginia by ignoring the effects of nuclear winter and assuming that life will find its irradiated way just fine and dandy. When you look at the Chernobyl incident, for example, how nature made a comeback into the area and how one of the most dangerous places for humans is now one of the safest places for wolves, you can see how they might creatively arrive at the idea. But a meltdown at a power plant and a world war are 2 different categories of atomic disaster. 20 years after the war is close enough to the nuclear winter to show wasteland at its rawest and most devastated. Fallout 4 was set 200 years after the war, for reference, so the tentative and sickly plant life in that game did feel appropriate and sensical. There's nothing, though, to explain the eternal autumn of Fallout 76's Appalachia that makes sense, unless you stop for a moment and consider the game in context with its peers and the current cultural moment of the United States. Although it features no living humans, the game expresses the anxieties of the pop cultural zeitgeist it was created in much more than any previous entry in the series. In many ways, the question is less, how does Fallout 76 compare to previous Fallouts, and more, why does Fallout 76 compare so directly to Far Cry 5? Both games use massive open worlds to present a kind of idealized American pastoral image, to use the frivolous violence and condensed visual artistry of the video game medium to try to articulate a hopeful reaffirmation of the old tropes of rugged individualism and self-determined frontier morality. That Fallout 76 ignores a nuclear winter is kind of a big deal. It's a well-known, widely understood consequence of nuclear war. To portray that consequence, though, would be to put creative emphasis on the cycles of predatory consumption that defined pre-war America in Fallout as a terminal disease, one that killed the host eventually. Instead, West Virginia is changed, but in many ways spared. This colorful backdrop allows the game to sell the old stories and Western myths at face value, where a wasteland's bitter and implacable emptiness would always work to subvert those things. Instead, players get to live out what's essentially a frontier homesteading fantasy with that pesky nuisance of existing civilizations and cultures surgically removed from the equation to give the player the blankest canvas possible. So, the vault opens, the people pour out, and the cycles of consumption and destruction begin again, free of guilt, free of memory, a world where the shelves are always full and the flowers are always blooming. You can even nuke it again yourself, and in 4 hours' time, no one will even know it happened. The system's designed to keep Fallout 4 in perpetual motion, to keep the player in an endgame hamster wheel where the game is never truly over in the traditional sense, were some of the most discouraging, frustrating features of that game. Yet, in Fallout 76, the cyclical pointlessness of clearing an area feels less arbitrarily discouraging and more compellingly necessary due to the mandatory always-on multiplayer of the game's design. Fallout 76 is neither massively multiplayer nor only small group co-op. Instead, it puts 24 people on a discrete server. If you have friends, you can join their server, and vice versa. Each server keeps track of items in its world separately, so a location you loot on one server may be fully stocked and untouched on another. Nukes fired on one server do not affect another, so if you leave one server where you've detonated a nuclear weapon, that blast zone will no longer be available to you. The map is extremely large, and generally speaking, it's unusual to come across another player. But you do more frequently find their handiwork, dead enemies and empty shelves. If a lot of players are in one region, like the low-level areas around Vault 76 on launch day, then the experience is frustratingly competitive. Fallout 76 does create individually instanced loot tables for individual players when looting containers and corpses, but items on the ground and items on shelves, usually the best items, refresh only once every so often. Enemies recycle frequently, but you can't loot enemies you haven't had a hand in killing personally. So there's a major incentive for scavenging to be done not only away from other players, but away from places that other players frequently traffic in a general sort of way. Most often, you'll find other players while doing events, repeatable side quests, which you can fast travel to on the map, even if you haven't discovered the area yet. So, even if you've been alone for a while, if you do a cool event, there's a good chance someone will drop in to share the fun. Then you'll make a friendly emote, and you'll part ways again, off to pursue your own agendas. And that's it. Fallout 76 is moderately multiplayer this way, a social space whose vast distances and demanding crafting loops discourage actually sharing the space. In Fallout 4, when I cleared a place and a day later it reset its enemies and items like I'd never been there at all, it made me feel like I'd wasted my time. Now, I'm kind of grateful for it, because if I go to a place and find it mostly barren and picked clean already, I know that if I simply come back in half an hour, I'll get the whole cornucopia of desk fans and typewriters and precious, precious duct tape. As a multiplayer experience, there's an understood that nothing can ever truly be resolved because the conflicts have to remain available for other players to come along and be the hero for it. It takes the sting out of stuff like Preston Garvey's Infinite Quest log. There, in Fallout 4, you'd turn in a randomly generated quest and immediately receive a randomly generated quest in a one-for-one loop that can never end. A single-player role-playing game ought to allow the player to conclude what they do, to see some sort of climax to their effort. Fallout 4's constant undermining of the value of the player's actions with its perform action A at location B for reward C structure of procedurally generated hamster wheel quests diminished the sense of the player's concreteness in the world, their agency, their meaning. In Fallout 76, there is no expectation of resolution. No one goes to Disneyland, rides the Indiana Jones ride, and then says, "What's everyone waiting in line for still? We already escaped the temple." It's not a narrative, it's an amusement, even if it is, still, an officially licensed Indiana Jones adventure. You can go get a hot dog and a soda, you can come back, you can do it again. You can come back in a year, it'll still be the same, save for the stalactites of chewing gum under the seats being larger. This is why most activities in the game, by a big margin, are events and not side quests. Ride the ride, get your friends, get back in line, do it again. Fallout 76 isn't a role-playing game in any meaningful way, not any more than Grand Theft Auto Online can be, with players pretending to be cops and robbers. It's Nuka World, made manifest as its own gigantic game map. There are even at least 3 actual amusement parks in the game world, all with events that function as carnival games, like a scavenger hunt for a Jangles the Moon Monkey doll, or a time trial for putting coal in little hidden ore carts. Having adjusted my expectations for Bethesda's Fallout canon down to a half-hearted shrug with Fallout 4, I was able to ignore what I wanted the game to be and focus on the bizarre carnival that it actually is. I don't expect an amusement park to have narrative consistency as much as I expect them to have funnel cake, and Fallout 76 straddles that line between artistic experience and coin-operated frivolity more precariously than nearly any other AAA game I've played in the past few years. Fallout 76 may not be much of a Fallout game when put side by side with the originals, but if you liked the originals and can stomach the idea of essentially visiting an ultra-violent, absolutely colossal digital Chuck E. Cheese's with Fallout-themed attractions and iconography for a time, then you know what, there's a good chance you'll still enjoy the time you spend with the game. This is the guiding design principle of Fallout 76. Nothing is permanent, nothing is quite believable, but fun is king, and there are prizes galore. That's been the driving paradox of the game for me. It ought to be something I don't like, and it's certainly something I didn't want when it was described to me before release, but every time I play it, I end up having a great time. No matter how dumb it is, no matter how badly it breaks, no matter how low the frame rate dips, I just keep sitting there, playing it in a pleasant fog. Even if it's little more than an amusement park, it is genuinely amusing. Take the way most quest rewards are set up. With a few exceptions among the main quests and the more complicated side quests, you typically receive your reward immediately after completing your objective. You'll kill a giant monster or find a hidden cache, and suddenly your HUD will light up like a slot machine, and a selection of useful items, from food and drink to armor pieces, magically appear in your inventory. You can fast travel for a handful of caps from event to event, mainlining that Skinnerian reinforcement right into your eyeballs, completing maybe a half dozen events in half an hour, more if you're lucky and the map's generating a lot of activity. You'll never have to slow down by returning to a quest giver, and most quests begin with a blast of dialogue over the radio, so there's often no concrete quest giver in the first place to return to. Since the rewards often give you a handful of resources that are more geared towards simply keeping you playing than enriching your character in any serious way, no single event is likely to quench an appetite for progress in a given play session. You'll have to do quite a few to see meaningful gains, and even then, the resources you use to complete an event might far outweigh what you get as a reward, putting you at a net negative in things like ammunition and rare repair components. So, to supplement the event side-questing cycle, it's important to layer in scavenging diversions. Most locations of the hundreds marked on the map, and the hundreds more unmarked locations, don't have any kind of formal content associated with them. Many don't even have a consistent enemy type, repopulating with something new after you or some other player temporarily clear the area out. Sometimes there's a little skeleton tableau to see and notes to read. With little luck, sometimes these notes and skeletons even contribute to a broader understanding of the world and its past events. Unlike Fallout 3, and to a lesser extent Fallout 4, most locations in the game world are not separated by a loading screen. They exist in reasonable architectural proportions in full integration with the landscape surrounding them. They're dense and quick, just like the events. This makes repetition easier to bear. Even if you get sent back later on, or find yourself sweeping through on a scavenging run, or playing the area with someone who hasn't seen it before, you're never committing more than 10 minutes or so to a single task. And then the depth and density of the map means that you're never more than 2 minutes away from the next thing to do. Perhaps most critically of all, because there is minimal narrative motivation and an extreme pervasive mechanical motivation to acquire and consume, returning to an area is just as rewarding the second time you do it as the first. The monsters will generate anew, closer to your current level. The shelves will automatically restock, but you know where they are now. The chests will roll a new loot table. You might even find new scraps of actual story you may have missed. Fallout games have always used character and dialogue to shape the world and paint the player within it. That's still somewhat true here, but less than ever. It's stuff that shapes the world, stuff that binds the player to it, and stuff that ultimately self-justifies the game's design to the point where it can survive without the thematic literary elements I always thought were the heart of Fallout. As an isometric game in the late 90s, Fallout could not lean too heavily on visual storytelling. Fallout 1 and 2 are astonishing for how much they accomplish with comparatively little, visually speaking, but the hope was always that you would see vistas and details in your imagination more impressive than what your monitor could display. Even in combat, the percentages to hit and miss took second stage to the little green text box that would describe your hit, the sound of the impact, the expression of the attack, the violence of a targeted shot to the head, and the agony of a targeted shot to the groin. But let's look at one Fallout 1 city in particular, the Necropolis. It's huge, but narratively barren. Aside from the main quest and a few spare side quests, it's just tumble-down buildings, shuffling ghouls, and dark sewers. Exploring every corner of the Necropolis is pointless and a little boring. The narrative focuses the player's activity, and the lack of value in the old TV dinners and flip lighters that line the shelves of the ruined city makes scavenging feel, if not pointless, then at least largely optional. Once you get to the hidden vault at the center of the city, the plot really gets rolling, but little of the surface areas really mean much besides the impression of desolation they give. Much of it is functionally useless as a physical space in the game world. Fallout 76 may not have the story that led a player to the Necropolis back in Fallout 1, but neither does it have any physical space as underutilized as the Necropolis surface. Fallout 1 asked, how do you make a player see a world beyond what's on the screen? And its gears turn primarily on these longer-term arcs of character and narrative progression that paint these portraits in the imagination. Fallout 76 asks, how do you make a storage closet interesting every time? And pivots much more on the concerns of the extreme short-term, real-time combat and navigation that retain their excitement in the face of terminal repetition. In Fallout 1, a place that's narratively barren is mechanically barren as well. In Fallout 76, there is a larger effort to use every part of the animal as far as how the player engages on a minute-to-minute basis with the game world. Most of the commonplace items in Fallout 76, from Blamco mac and cheese to Buff Out to Mr. Handy the Robot Butler, were creatively developed for Fallout 1. What was lost when Bethesda modernized the series with Fallout 3 was item descriptions, the short paragraphs that put this junk in context with your character's journey. For example, you could find old boxes of mac and cheese just like in Fallout 76 way back in Fallout 1, but instead of providing food value, or being monetarily valuable, it's just cheap detritus whose item description emphasizes how your character, having grown up in the vault, isn't quite sure what instant mac and cheese even means as a phrase. The thing is a valueless mystery of a gone-away world, so, having picked up one box of 80-year-old irradiated noodles and read the description, you're unlikely to do so again. It offers minor thematic value and then becomes a useless part of the game world, a prop. In Fallout 3 and forward, these food items can provide healing. You pick them up because they're now useful in a minor way. They now provide nutritional instead of thematic value. Fallout 76's low-key survival mechanics, insisting that your character eat and drink on a regular basis, further increases the desirability of these formerly decorative objects. But that's food. What about all the typewriters, all the screwdrivers, all the random junk that a Bethesda game still allows you to pick up? Fallout 3 gave you a gun that let you shoot junk as ammunition, and Fallout New Vegas made certain junk items meaningfully valuable as trade items, but it wasn't until Fallout 4 that Bethesda made all of this stuff purposeful. With that game, as with this one, every single object, no matter how inconsequential, has some kind of scrap component inside of it that can be broken down to use, and then these scrap components can be used to create, modify, and now to repair guns and armor as they degrade. Fallout 76 requires truly massive amounts of scrap, in dozens of varieties, to keep advancing your inventory in pace with your effective character level. They're parallel, symbiotic avenues of progression. You need stuff to kill creatures and finish quests. Killing creatures and finishing quests will lead you to stuff. If one of these systems of progression falls out of pace with the other, the difficulty feels awkward and the combat balance feels wrong. So no matter how mundane a place, from a gas station to a shattered apartment building, even if it has no story value, each room in that building is a roll of the dice on something meaningfully valuable to the core experience of navigating the world of Fallout 76. Was it worth it to walk 3 minutes towards a map marker that's little more than a moldering farmstead? Absolutely. They had duct tape for adhesive and a wrench set you can melt for lead to make ammunition. They had 25-year-old Twinkies to eat and equally ancient cola to be used in making grenades. Little was learned, little of consequence happened. What enemies you killed and what things you took will return in time. And yet, in every corner of every room of every building on the property are little tiny hits of positive reinforcement that tell a player they found something useful and valuable and have done well in being so clever as to have found it at all. The flow of minor accomplishments is so fast and so wide that it's hard to notice sometimes the absence of the more esoteric, complicated things I'd thought that I would miss more. Instead, I float atop the superficiality of Fallout 76 in a little boat made of my own ego, casting out a fishing line that hooks treasure disguised as trash. No living NPCs mean that there are no real towns that don't functionally double as dungeon areas. There's no culture that isn't written down in journals or recorded on holotape still clutched by the withered fingers of the long dead. The 24 players spread across the map rarely create towns unless they already know each other in person or over voice chat. I can think of perhaps once that I ran across an actual building laid down by another player, and even then it was only a single structure. What this means to a player, though, is that like the scavenging loop or the experience loop, the explorative loop yields the same level of constant, undifferentiated positive feedback anywhere you choose to go. There's no hub of quest givers, no settlements to assist. Enemies and scrap have value, but enemies and scrap are everywhere. Occasionally, events and quests will supplement and enhance the value of the scrap or the number of the enemies. Yet, screws, adhesive, lead, ceramic, all the crafting materials are equally important at level 50 as they are at level 5. More so, really, since you need so much more of them to craft items rated at higher levels. And you need to break down dozens and dozens of the same weapon to unlock the more impressive modifications for it. A single weapon crafted with modification can use something like 50 screws and 60 adhesive. Yet, these materials are only available in proportions that make sense. A house might have a toaster in the kitchen, a fan in the bedroom, and a typewriter on the desk, all with 1 or 2 springs and screws per item. Loot a newsroom, or the Capitol building, though, and there's typewriters galore. A barn might have a lot of metal and glue, a garage might have oil and circuitry. Towards the end of the main quest, you access a bunker with shelves and shelves full of useful things, but the most exciting, by far for me, was the 30 clipboards all on a shelf. 30 springs! What a haul! That's a dumb thing to get excited about, but I'm not even conveying how much of a thrill it was at the time. For Fallout 4, there were a ton of quests and a ton of NPCs, but it was rare for them to be memorable. It was rare for them to have names. Their blandness pulled focus from the free-form wandering that's been a critical part of the experience since Fallout 3. Fallout 76's quests are technically long, requiring multiple stops and pinballing a player to multiple corners of the map, but any individual part of the quest is quick, simple, and requires no choice or input besides obeying the map markers. Exploring the map and coming into contact with the unstructured parts of the game is something like half the focus of the structured, scripted content. Enemies will scale to a player's level, with some variation between regions, like the woodland around Vault 76 always being low level, and the cranberry bog being relentlessly high level. With every variety of building offering a sensibly scaled and rewarding variety of salvage, and every enemy type dropping a different sort of ammunition or animal scrap, it is impossible to go in a direction that isn't equally worthwhile and enriching. Since some of these elements are randomized and all of these elements regenerate, even repeating content you've seen before can yield new rewards. Fallout 76 has successfully crafted a moderately multiplayer game environment where 80% of the map remains useful and viable to a player through the very endgame, facilitating some significant freedom of choice when it comes to where you want to go and when. The best parts of Fallout 3 and 4 were the parts spent wandering, scavenging, piecing together the lost histories of the world's skeletons. Fallout 76 is only that part of the modern Fallout experience, with everything else surgically removed and strategically replaced. A big part of me is still very reluctant to simply accept that the dialogue-driven exposition that I loved in the old Interplay Fallouts in New Vegas just doesn't matter much to the Bethesda modern franchise. But it is self-defeating to ignore all the positives that this total reorientation towards the aspects of visual interactive world-building that Bethesda is known for being good at represents. Fallout 76 is not the game for those still mourning Van Buren or New Vegas. It'll piss you right off. But it is a significant, compelling evolution of the design values Bethesda has been playing around with and refining since Fallout 3. Think back on how Fallout 3 was covered by critics on release. It was a pretty universal comment that the best storytelling in the game was accomplished with skeletons and props. Remember the actual dialogue of the game? Have you seen my father, a middle-aged man? Fallout 76 honestly feels more closely tied to Fallout 3 than 4 sometimes in how fully it pivots to that game's strengths and excises its weaknesses. Consider how Fallout 4's partial integration with the Fallout Shelter mobile game and its settlement mechanics meant that no settlement had a strong defined identity. It was instead left to the player to build those details from scratch themselves. They even let you build your own damn vault in the DLC. It was a lot. Too much to take charge of, while also following your curiosity across the landscape based on whim and quest marker, like you did in Fallout 3 in New Vegas. Fallout 4 was juggling a lot of sub-games at once. Parts of Fallout 3, parts of Fallout Shelter, a new crafting loop. The player's camp in Fallout 76 is a fun amount of customization that fits in more elegantly with the player's other concerns than settlements ever did, and the general rhythm of play is more consistent in Fallout 76 than it was in Fallout 4. The removal of dialogue is a bitter pill to swallow, sure, but it is a minor part of the overall Fallout 4 experience anyway, Far Harbor excluded. The dialogue wheel there generally only served to add some slight personalization to yes and no responses. And even in Fallout 3, the choices between good and evil were typically binary and often very silly, like deciding whether to fix or poison the water purifying system or whether or not you wanted to be a slaver. Fallout 76 has always-on microphone, or had until they decided to patch in a push-to-talk feature weeks after launch. Why have a dialogue tree when the only people there are people who can already talk back with their real mouth words? Multiplayer was, in this case, intended to functionally replace a scripted dialogue tree. A script is how you interact with a machine, and the intention was for the game to be, ideally, a more dynamic role-playing space than that, because you could speak as freely as you could at a tabletop. This aspect of the design, and I wonder to whose actual surprise this has been, turned out to be a complete dud. The kind of intentions they had for player behavior are obvious with the way factions are implemented in the game. Bethesda made a big deal about these factions before launch, which struck people as strange since there are no living NPCs. How are they supposed to work? Well, the main quests are designed as a tour of the map and a tour of the factions. First is their responders, wasteland good guys and good Samaritans, who function like the Minutemen. Only difference is, the Minutemen were focused on settlements, and the responders were focused on individuals in need to better fit with the removal of settlements and the primacy of emergent multiplayer play. If you're trying to be nice in the game, a helpful sort, doesn't that kind of make you a responder-ish? Then there's the Raiders, who it took me a while to realize don't actually exist in the game at all. Raider strongholds dot the mountains that divide the game's middle, filled with weapons and corpses. The first few times I went through, I saw the Raider corpses and thought another player had killed them. Then I realized how complete the removal of NPCs was. Raiders are replaced by the Scorched, which are like a new variety of feral ghoul with a central consciousness and who use weapons. Even the Raiders, cannon fodder since the very first game, are too sentient to coexist with 24 rambunctious players. Still, the Raiders have a robot with whom you spend a lot of time, and you get to know their values. Shootin', lootin'. Then the Brotherhood of Steel, technology hoarders that they are. And last, the Enclave, dangerous, manipulative. Even though the Enclave are traditional villains, all players must complete their questline to complete what there is of a main plot and reach the endgame. The idea seems to be that these factions will represent the kinds of playstyles and self-directed goals and attitudes that a player might develop over the course of the game. A faction system that runs itself, right? Just add players. Unfortunately, the game world is so artificial and so thoroughly gamified that there's no pressure to actually role-play anything, little motivation to even speak to other players at all. Plus, an always-on microphone is intimate in a way I don't think they planned on. Rather than encourage role-playing, it pulls the outside world into the game in immersion-damaging ways. You hear bong tokes, loud crunching and munching, screaming, cackling arguments between children, frustrated parents and spouses, demanding that players take a pause, and then those players testily explaining that they can't actually pause the game, and Jesus, would you hold on 2 seconds, please? It feels awkward to even contemplate doing an in-character out-loud roleplay when 9 times out of 10 the other person is just going to take a dab, belch, and loot the room while you prattle on. In creating an amusement park environment, they've created an amusement park mood. Just because you're in the same photo on the log ride doesn't make you brothers in arms. It's obvious to everyone involved that the stakes are low and the environment completely artificial. That shared understanding of a lack of meaning becomes a shared attitude, an attitude wildly intensified by unfiltered access to the living room soundscapes of total strain. Perhaps in later updates there'll be some mechanical system for faction allegiance, but at the moment they're just a naive hope that will never materialize without organizational guidance from the game systems themselves. The faction system that there is detrimental to the general storytelling as well, because those factions are so obviously centered around potential playstyles and player interests more than they are humanistic principles of values and vision. The responders are a reasonable idea, but that they should be a whole power block seems weird. Or the Free States, a collection of bunkers built by American secessionists. They've got one of the longest, farthest-reaching backstories in the game, with terminals and environmental clues painting a clearer and clearer picture of who they were and what they wanted. Essentially, they're a doomsday prepper movement given a kind of moral authority by the plot, extremely close to how Far Cry 5 articulated one group of preppers as being the good ones. In the world of Fallout, it makes more sense. The government actually is demonstrably lying to and experimenting on its citizens in gross and cruel ways. Not trusting Vault Tech is a great call. But there doesn't seem to be more than a dozen or so people in the Free States, with small families having their own shelters. Thematically, it's a working-class nuclear family rebuttal of Vault-Tech's elitist social engineering and some of the game world's more cynical political commentary. Their presence in the script and the landscape is disproportionately large compared to their actual number and strength. Or the Brotherhood of Steel's presence in the game, which is a little absurd given the lore of the franchise. Consider the last major spin-off, Fallout Tactics. It needed the Brotherhood as a foundation to build a military squad combat game off, so it sent them on a Zeppelin-driven journey following the super mutants as they moved east following the climax of Fallout 1. It's canonically a little dubious, taking place in the Midwest and making it seem like that was the furthest east the Brotherhood had ever gotten. Fallout 3 takes place afterwards, deeper into that mutant migration. They pick up where Fallout Tactics left off. So those guys in Fallout 3 made sense, and then Fallout 4 was geographically right next door to Fallout 3 and chronologically afterwards, so that goes to follow as well. However, having both super mutants and the Brotherhood in Appalachia 25 years after the war only makes sense from a marketing perspective, not a lore-driven one. Bethesda released a very catty response to fan grousing by saying they won't be creatively beholden to the errata of 20-year-old games. But for me, the issue is that in choosing to recycle these elements, they're making a choice not to be creative within the new setting, relying instead on post-hoc justifications to maximize brand recognition in trailers and advertising material. For example, even though The Scorched clearly began as a way to replace the Raider class of enemy, the main plot's steady unraveling of their origins is interesting, and finding their source is one of the game's few truly engaging mysteries. Nuking the fissure at the heart of their nest network releases the Scorch Beast Queen, boss of the whole game world, a raid creature intended to be defeated by 8 players or more. By contrast, the super mutants are there because there were vats of green goo just like the military base in Fallout 1, here too. Seeing the vats is fun, but it's hardly a mystery, just an entertaining callback that makes for an adequate explanation of their presence. The amount of effort put into making it seem reasonable for the Brotherhood of Steel to be operating in the region, though, is intense. There are holotapes that would be a lore junkie's dream in days past, like audio of the formation of the Brotherhood and the opinions of the men and women who forged its strange and insular culture. Would be, anyway, because the whole thing feels so desperate to explain the choice to include them at all that it makes the lore seem somehow dubious. It's Bethesda's world now. They make the creative calls. All of this is official stuff. But listening to this retrofit backstory now, addendums and modifications to the lore of the very first game, it makes me a little sad. Had they made something up entirely from scratch, I would have been more engaged by it. I would have respected it more. Fallout 76 is brash and bold in its rejection of elements of the old games it doesn't mechanically or thematically want, and I'm willing to meet it there, in those novel places that it is so damn insistent on taking me. But with the Brotherhood of Steel, this nostalgic self-cannibalism runs aggressively counter to that spirit of novelty, and emphasizes the differences between this game and the old ones in an unfavorable way. Setting up parallels between the old, world-weary Maxon from Fallout 1 and the young, domineering presence on Fallout 76's holotapes only highlights how much more natural the old storytelling felt. If I'm willing to give up on what I wanted in favor of being open to the new thing that they've actually made, I really wish that they were bold enough to take off the training wheels and put as much confident novelty into the writing as they did into the structural design. I mean, there's so much of this game that makes it seem like they just didn't give a fuck. But it doesn't apply universally. The Enclave's role in the game as villain, merchant, and nuclear command center is even weirder. By making every player a member, the Enclave is utterly defanged of any thematic significance or weight. They're just another ride at the park. Good, evil, those are illustrations on the side of a soda cup, like the rebels and the Empire at Disneyland. You'd think, after everything you've seen, you wouldn't want to launch a nuclear bomb, or do the dirty work of the villain from both Fallouts 2 and 3, or that any kind of honest attempt to roleplay in the world would reckon with this as a dilemma. A dilemma, though, would mean that you wouldn't get to ride the biggest, most dangerous ride in the park. Fallout 76 doesn't want anything to stand in between you and the front of the line for the thermonuclear thrill coaster. The flip side of the plot's sometimes frustrating writing is that you encounter it sporadically and casually, so when something good does come up, you remember it more. Some of it can be extremely well written, like the Overseer's logs. Her character feels grounded and real in a way that the game rarely does, when rusty, dented nanny robots are sending you to look for children who went missing 2 decades in an apocalypse ago. And many individual journal entries are emotionally weighted, well written. It's the cumulative picture, though, its tonal inconsistency, and the obvious favor shown toward marketability over creativity in some key areas that eats away at the mosaic of believability that these fragments of creativity are trying to create. The whole no NPCs rule starts to feel very arbitrary by the end of the game, since robots fulfill NPC functions anyway by delivering dialogue, starting and ending quests, even providing occasional flavor dialogue, like 2 bots I came across in an endless loop of questions, or the Mr. Prize bot who whirs up out of the wilderness to give you exciting coupons and certificates for businesses that no longer exist. The biggest exception is a sly, rare one. There's a wandering super mutant named Graham who will sell you things. That's all. Just a merchant of an enemy type that already exists in the game. But this exception kind of breaks the rule, or at least renders it extremely suspect. I came across him twice